To the August meeting of the Provo City Board of Adjustment. Before we get underway, I believe staff has some comments about rules that will govern our meeting this evening, and then we'll begin moving through our items. All right, so we do have three rather robust items to. We will begin. Our first item is as follows. Paul Evans requests an appeal of an administrative decision by the Planning Commission for approval of signage for Timpanogos Towers, an apartment building located at 1900 North Canyon Road in the campus mixed-use CMU zone. Pleasant View neighborhood. So we will begin then with our staff report and continue from there.
Turn the mic on here. Brandon Larson, Development Service staff. I'll be handling the appeal on this one. So if I so I'll show you the property about that first. So this is the subject property is at the intersection of Canyon Road and Stadium Avenue, just north of Bell Edwards Stadium. It's a new apartment complex, 4 stories. Not occupied yet. They submitted a building permit for signage, and staff realized that, so they submitted the permit, it was approved. Staff realized there was a mistake and then realized this issue needed to go. Signage standards would apply to the CMU. So the Planning Commission on June 22nd acted to apply the mouthful. So I'll read off my report here. Off the North University Avenue River Bottoms Design Corridor and Specialty Support Sign Standards. So what their action was to apply the that North University set of sign standards to that particular CMU zone. So they acted, and they did so with the conditions that beyond just applying it to those sign standards, that size of the sign couldn't be greater than 87 feet, and the brightness of the sign would not that in a minute, but But so the Planning Commission acted, and then there was found that there was procedural error. I believe it was July 5th, fixed their motion. And then shortly after, within the prescribed time, an appeal was made by Paul Evans. Sorry about that. So, some bugs first go round in this new room. So, actually, bill was made prior to that most recent. So, the bill was made by the applicant, and so, so the two appeals brought before, and really, again, our discussion should be confined to these two issues. Was the sign for an 87 square foot illuminated sign issued in a Planning Commission act in error in their classification of this? Those are the two questions before this body. Just some background information to help you get. So this is kind of the design of the sign. Obviously, and I need to back up. So when the building permit was issued by staff and they realized they made a mistake, they put a hold on the building permit. And so that permit's been on hold. That sign's never been. So you can see the design for the Timp Tower sign there. Long channel lettering sign, backlit. Told it would have the same brightness of a roughly a street light. I will note that the decision by the Planning Commission, were important questions here, is did the Planning Commission act in error in their review? And they referenced this section that I'll kind of cursor, that section 1438.110, relied heavily on that section to make their decision. So now just a little bit, show you some pictures of the building, and then and the proposed, you can see with my cursor the superimposed, that again the sign's not there, potentially would look like. So there's a render sign would look like on the building during the. So I'm back to again, as far as nits go, this is kind of a reference point. Planning Commission acted to, for the velocity of these signs to and you can see the varying degrees. The 400 element sign is this 200. You can see the other example. Greatest nit sign. It's familiar to. So going to go back to those, but just want to give you a little look at the looking, kind of looking northeast across the kind of looking on the eastern, one of northward towards Timpanogos, northward across the west face of the see kind of the north and east side of the this is kind of an L-shaped complex, and so this is portion of this longest portion that runs down Canyon Road towards Livingston. Across the street from this, there's a church, apartment complexes. This is kind of what's east of. So just wanted to give you a little bit of context for the site there. And so going back to this, going back to this slide, I wanted to point out a couple of things. So again, the applicant's appealing, saying that the building permit was issued in error. Staff says that's a moot point because the bill is not timely. It was not applied for within the 14-period window. The appeal came forward on, permit was issued on June 6th, or June 7th rather June 6th, placed on June 6th when it was issued. The appeal on June 3rd, so that was 16 days intervening. So first appeal is moot, not a for this body to consider. So best you throw that issue fine. But as far as the second issue, did the Planning Commission act in error in their review and classification of the sign type and considered by this body? Again, the Planning Commission, their action was to apply the North University River Bottoms Design Corridor standards to this sign. That was their action. They relied heavily on this section of code, which is in 1438-110, signs permitted and others. Felt that this section of code allowed them to apply it to specific CMU zoning, which they did. They felt that they were within their right and reason and acted according to a person standard to apply those set of standards to that particular sign and property. There was a question brought up by the applicant as to whether or not that they had applied a particular class, correctly applied a classification. Staff would argue that university standards are very much commercial, so that they did apply that they applied a commercial classification to that. In addition to that, so in doing that, again, they applied conditions to their approval. We believe, and we're going to take back up just a bit. So in my staff report, or staff's staff report, concluded that we made some conclusion that made conclusions in there, and we're actually changed those conclusions after considering this issue further. After the staff report was written, we feel like the Planning Commission acted within their according to the reasonable person standard and applied University Avenue River Bottom Design Corridor standards according to section 1438.110. Also feel like we also believe that this is akin to applications similar to those like a conditional use permit, right, to apply conditions that they acted within their right to apply conditions to the application. Staff recommend that you uphold the action of the Planning Commission, act accordingly. So that's my report, and I'm here for questions.
Right, thank you. We will allow members of the board to ask any questions that they have of staff.
I have no immediate questions for right now.
Same for me. I have no questions at this point, although I know I will. Ask questions for later.
Okay, what I might ask may be redundant, but if you would speak maybe specifically to what kind of caused or what reference point what caused you to change your recommendation from the original report to what's being presented today, just so that we can make sure we understand and follow the new line of thinking. And
I think originally we had taken the stance that I think we were looking at this narrowly, and that original position was it had to be applied to the whole CM. As we looked at this closely, that it doesn't necessarily say that it has to be applied to the entire CMU zone, but it can be applied to specific CMU zone properties. And so that's kind of where that's kind of our position. The other, feel like the Planning Commission feel like they looked at this section of the code, applied it, noting also that they questions that was brought up concern classify this, and we argue that they classified as a commercial property. So again, we feel like this can be applied to specific properties, and we feel like which happened in this case, arguing the Planning Commission appropriately in applying it to specific. I think we're concerned that if we don't take that action, that the CMU zones can be applied. It's already in various portions of the city, and it can be applied, and it could potentially be applied in multiple parts of the city. And so applying the sign standards, maybe it made sense to apply the North University signs here, but maybe wouldn't make sense in other CMU zoned properties. And so we feel like that flexibility puts us in a better position. So that's really where I think we're coming from on that issue. As far as conditions, I think initially felt like, that specifically say that the Planning Commission can apply conditions, but I feel like after looking at it, that kind of akin to something like they're making such a big, decision. They have the ability to apply conditions or the issue. They can apply conditions to mitigate concerns, because it's kind of a weird setup the way the zone reads, and if we don't apply conditions, it really makes it hard to it's kind of our thinking on our change.
Thank you for speaking to that. I think we'll move to the portion of this item where we will hear from the applicant or their representative. Is Evans here or their representative? You would state your name and address for the record, and then we'd love to hear your presentation.
Now it's working. I may be mistaken, but is this the first meeting in this room, public meeting?
It is.
Okay, well, then we're all members of an inaugural event. That's going to be great. To start, I'm a little bit taken back by the staff's reversal of their decisions, and would request an opportunity to review that. I haven't had any chance to look at those decisions. I've been operating based on the staff report and based on the information I provided. So if you can take that into account as we discuss things tonight, as to the opportunity to actually understand what the city is saying and being able to respond to that in an appropriate way. But I prepared for you, which you've received, a 12-page summary of the issues, and you have that. You also have in writing the staff report that followed up on that, and so I'll refer to those throughout my presentation tonight. And in the spirit of conciseness and time management, I thought I would focus only on one of the two issues, since the second issue, and that is, did the Planning Commission act errantly, according to the staff report, 10 days ago, had 7 different issues where it said, yes, it looks like this was a problem. So I'll, at the end, I'd be happy to clarify anything or answer any questions you have about both issues, but I'm going to focus primarily on the issue of the building permit. And so if you would look at the Board of Adjustment staff report at the bottom of page 2 and continuing on to page 3, it starts, and I quote, on June 6, 2022, Development Services issued the permit for the subject wall sign and promptly placed the permit application on hold June 7, 2022. Why? Because Development Services determined that they did not have the authority to issue a building permit for the Timpanogos Towers requested sign without prior action by the Planning Commission. Issued the sign, but they realized they needed Planning Commission action before that sign could be valid and acted on, or before that permit could be valid and acted on. So any performance or activity related to the building permit was placed on hold by direct action of Provo City Development Services until the Provo City Planning Commission could act to apply an appropriate sign regulation to the campus mixed-use zone. Okay? Pretty straightforward sort of idea. So Timpanogos Towers, through their subcontractor, were directly notified by Development Services that the permit was on hold. The Provo City Pleasant View neighborhood was directly contacted saying the building permit is on hold. So the application process for the building permit began in March of this year. And again, if I refer back to the Board of Adjustment staff report, page 5, and I quote, "The applicant for the sign permit went through the appropriate process to obtain approval of the sign permit. Although there were interruptions and a hold on the application process, the permit was never withdrawn and is still considered issued, but the process is on hold until the applicable issues referenced herein are addressed." Yes, the application process for the issuance of a valid building permit is still ongoing. The application process involves submittal of plans, the review of those plans by staff, the circulation of those plans to other departments in the city for consensus that there's no other problem, a determination of compliance with applicable signed regulation to Provo City Code, and also determination of compliance with all applicable Provo City Code requirements. I mean, that's part of the approval process. That all goes on before the permit is issued. So the application process for a building permit does not reasonably proceed after the issuance of a building permit. Say that a different way. If a permit is issued, the idea is the issues have been resolved. And so any other issues have to be resolved afterwards are independent. Now, you can't go back and modify the permit. If it wasn't done correctly, the permit really doesn't exist if you still are going through the application process. Now, otherwise, if it's otherwise, both the permit holder and Provo City and neighbors and citizens would always be wondering, well, what's going on? I mean, modifications are still occurring. And so it's a real difficult issue in this particular case. So the issuance of building permits is actually a planning commission action. It's a referred action to the under specified conditions to planning commission staff. And in this instance, staff errantly issued a building permit which was placed on hold less than 24 hours later. Why? Because they did not have the authority to do it. So is a permit that is issued, that's errantly issued, is it a valid building permit? Interesting question. So 2 items remain that had to be addressed in this application process that were not done before issuance of the building permit. So 1, and I'll come to back to 2 in a moment. But first, I had to determine if the sign requested in the building permit was in compliance with applicable sign regulations. That would be the determination that was needed to be made. Staff errantly issued a building permit for a sign using, without authority, the downtown zone sign regulation. That's what the permit was issued on June 6th. So on the 22nd of June, then the Provo City Planning Commission approved the building permit using the North University Avenue River Bottoms Design Corridor sign regulations. So initially issued on June 6th, the downtown zone staff report to the Planning Commission said, we recommend downtown zone, that's what's closest, but it was changed by the Planning Commission on the 22nd of June to say, we approve the sign using the North University Avenue Design Corridor sign standards. So the permit was modified. Before It was issued with a downtown zone. Now it's issued with a North University Avenue Design Corridor sign standard. The application process involving a determination of compliance with a planning commission determined sign regulation was seemingly completed at that point. I say seemingly because we're here tonight due to errant actions in this whole process. But what is being appealed tonight is the building permit as modified by the Planning Commission on the 22nd of June. The appeal was submitted on the 23rd, less than 24 hours later. So you cannot appeal the issuance of a building permit that is still in the process of building permit approval. And that's what happened in this case. Issued on the 6th incorrectly, had to wait for the approval process to complete. That was presumably done on the 22nd of June. We appealed it the next day. The Board of Adjustment staff identified that the time between the 6th of June and the Planning Commission action on the 22nd of June was an interruption in the building permit application and approval process. We agree. The approval process was still underway. Had to have Planning Commission approval for sign regulation for that permit to be valid. So the Planning Commission staff, in an email on the 23rd of June, and this is in the material that I sent to you, informs the Timpanogos Towers sign subcontractor that, and I quote, this is on the 23rd of June from Provo City staff to Timpanogos Towers. The sign permit was approved by the Planning Commission last night. You may now move forward with the permit. We appealed it that very day on the 23rd. The modified permit was approved by action of the Planning Commission on 22 June, and the modified permit was appealed on the 23rd. The appeal process allows for a timely appeal of the most immediate action. Otherwise, permits could be issued under one set of conditions, and then through a continuing approval process, change the conditions after the 14 days have expired, and there'd be no mechanism by which you could appeal. That would be confusing. So the building permit PRSG 2022-00497 was issued in error, and the appeal to the Board of Adjustment is timely. Now, I said there were two items that were on hold in the determination in the approval process. The first was the lack of authority by the Planning Commission staff to determine compliance with sign regulation for the campus mixed-use zone. There is no sign regulation. Planning Commission needed to apply a sign regulation. We just visited that issue in short. The second determination that is incomplete in this building permit application process is whether or not the requested building permit is in compliance with other and all Provo City code. And I refer you to issue 1 in the material provided to you as requested, in which we look at the zone, campus mixed use zone. This is under issue 1 from what I sent you. Campus mixed use zone, this is Provo City Code 1414E 100. And pay attention to the shalls and the musts. Those are always compulsory actions that occur. They are not at the discretion, and they're not, based on anybody, other people's interpretation. 1414E 100 states, prior to the issuance of a building permit for any multiple residential project over 2 dwelling units, Timpanogos Towers readily fits within that category at 121 dwelling units. A contract must be entered into between Provo City and the developer. That's a must. There must be a contract between Provo City and the developer agreeing to a determined occupancy based on a given number of parking spaces. The contract shall be recorded with the Utah County Recorder's Office and shall be a covenant running with the property. A copy of the recorded deed for the property in question must also be submitted prior to the issuance of a building permit, which indicates the maximum allowable occupancy as a deed restriction. Attached to the deed must be a document that separately lists the occupancy according to Provo City Code. It goes on, more musts and shalls all the way through. At the Planning Commission meeting, we noticed this to the Planning Commission and said, do not proceed with the approval of the building permit because it is not in compliance with Provo City Code. It directly violates the campus mixed-use zone provisions of the requirement for these documents that are to be recorded and notarized. And so they have not been met, but they must and shall be done before a valid building permit can be issued. So the building permit approval process for the sign on Timpanogos Towers is still not complete. Still haven't met all of those requirements to ensure that everything is in compliance before the building permit is issued. Now, no one ever said that the sign regulations of Provo City were a model of clarity. So, we've got a lot of issues that are running around on this one. So the most straightforward action by the board this evening, or as you may even decide to continue based on new information is just provided that everybody has not had a chance to consider. But the most straightforward action is just to reverse the approval of the building permit and remand the issue back to the Planning Commission. Allow for the approval process is still undergoing to complete before a permit is issued. And this would allow for this whole process to proceed without these complications of whether or not a permit is in place. Alternatively, you could continue the ongoing building permit ad hoc approval process implemented by Provo City Planning Commission staff and Board of Adjustment staff to allow for the Planning Commission to start over with a public hearing and act on the sign regulation for the campus mixed-use zone, and for Provo City and Timpanogos Towers to complete the contract deed restrictions, notarized requirements, all of this approval process activity to occur whilst the errant building permit remains on hold, waiting postmortem resuscitation efforts. So thank you for your time and consideration. Is there anything I can clarify, or do you have any questions I can help you with?
Thank you. Members of the board, anyone like to?
Oh, I forgot to say, my name is Paul Evans and I live in Provo.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Question about how you are referring to this project and how the city, it has been, are you thinking high density residential or?
Oh, absolutely.
Commercial
It's high density
commercial?
residential. It's 121 one-bedroom apartments. And personally, I think the building looks good, and it's a project that's going to be a benefit to the city. And I think in the end, a benefit to the neighborhood. This isn't an issue about the project. All the nice pictures of the project and everything else were great, but I'm just saying we need a process that we as citizens can count on as being followed according to code.
I appreciate that. So I have a question for staff. Is there a distinction between high density residential and commercial use? Is there any question about that when it comes to the signage and the issuance of the building permit?
This is, again, as we stated earlier, this should confine the discussion at this meeting. Was the building planning commission acting there in the review and classification of this discussion of what the building is or what the sign's going to be attached to is part of our discussion.
Okay, so better stated, would that issue affect issue A? That's irrelevant to this.
Yeah, we believe that, number one, we still maintain that it is that the appeal timely. The building permit was issued on, never withdrawn. The process for building permit continues once that process played until the issue with signage was addressed. But that permit was never.
Brandon, can I speak to that?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's, in the Board of Adjustment chapter of the Provo City Code, it talks about when somebody appeals an action to the Board of Adjustment, it stays all proceedings in furtherance of that action. This is akin to that, where the permit was issued on June 6th. And then we put a hold on it, staying the proceedings in furtherance of the action. Doesn't mean the permit hadn't been issued. The permit had been issued. What we said is you can't build based on that permit until we resolve this issue that we've discovered after we issued the permit. So there's nothing in the code that would suggest that tolls the statute of limitations for appealing an action to the Board of Adjustment. The chapter on the procedures of the Board of Adjustment states that the procedures have to be strictly followed. That, in other words, substantial compliance is not good enough. Strict compliance is required. So if it was untimely, then he could appeal, I think, the modification of the permit. So he raised the issue that if you change the permit, then all of a sudden you've lost a chance. After 14 days, you've lost a chance to appeal. I think that's a red herring. He could appeal the Planning Commission action, which modified the permit, because that was timely. But the initial permit itself was issued on June 6th. He was aware of it for more than 14 days before he appealed. And so because he had actual knowledge of the issuance of the permit and more than 14 days elapsed before he actually appealed, our position is that that the appeal of the permit itself is untimely. Now, I don't think anyone's disputing that appealing the Planning Commission action, which modified the permit, was timely. I agree with that.
So just to clarify our purview tonight, the appeal as it's being presented is to the initial approval done back in early June, or are we in fact talking about that later decision made by the Planning Commission?
Yes. The answer to that, you're considering both issues. Now, the staff's position is the first issue, the appeal was untimely. And so if you determine that it was untimely, then that's the end of it. There's no jurisdiction for the Board of Adjustment to consider the merits. If you disagree and determine it was timely, then you would consider the merits.
If I can make a comment, and that is whether or not the building permit is rescinded is not the issue. We're asking that the appropriate and correct approval process is followed before construction goes forward. And we've tried to lay out, with the fact that there's no contract about occupancy and vacancy, that's still not yet taken care of at the city and developer level. and then the process by which the Planning Commission went through to make their determinations. And I listed for you, and in the initial staff report, there's general concurrence that the Planning Commission had made six different errors. And I just point out one of them was probably the most egregious, when a Planning Commission member inquired of staff whether or not a residential sign regulation could be considered for application to the commercial mixed-use zone. And as documented in the report that I sent you, the staff directly replied, no, you cannot consider a residential sign standard for the commercial mixed-use zone. And that's just one of the errors that we allege and ask for your consideration in looking at. Second, the idea that you can apply a sign regulation to a building in the commercial mixed-use zone and in another parcel also zoned commercial mixed-use zone, that building would have a different sign regulation, directly violates state code, which requires that all buildings within a particular zone have the same standards. You just can't do that. The application of the sign regulation is to be applied to the zone and not to a parcel. That's what the Planning Commission is given the authority to act on. There's I could go through each of the issues if you want and talk about them, but you've got those and you've had a chance to just trying to help move things along by responding to questions.
Did you have a question?
I do. For the city attorney, is it Mr. Hanson?
Draper.
Draper, I'm sorry.
Fine.
Can you address the point that he brought up about a contract, and whether or not that was in place before?
Sure. I mean, that relates to the contract to build the building itself, not to build a sign. So there's separate permits that were issued. And,
Well,
and so that's not what we're here about tonight. We're here about the permit for the sign. Obviously, there's nobody occupying the sign. We're not talking about a deed restriction on how many people can live inside the sign. So it would be absurd to try to apply that to the sign, a building permit for the issuance of a sign. That is reference to the building permit for the issuance of the building itself, and how many people can occupy it.
I understand that.
That's not what we're here about tonight. Any building permits issued to build the building. The building is built. That ship has sailed. We're about just the sign.
Right. It's just that it says that a contract must be entered before a building permit is issued. And I was just wondering.
Right. That's not what we're here about tonight. Whether or not contracts were entered into, whether or not the procedure was properly followed. It's a red herring. We're here about a sign. And obviously, we're not talking about deed restrictions on how many people can live inside the sign. We're talking about
I
the
understand
sign.
that.
I do have a question.
Sure.
If you could address the implications of either decision that we come to. What are the implications for the city, if we determine that it was, that the timing on this is in accordance and that we agree with staff's recommendation? What is the implication?
So let me make sure I understand your question correctly. So what is the implication if you agree with staff that the appeal of the permit was not timely, but which recommendation? The recommendation tonight that the Planning Commission was correct in the way it classified it, or the recommendation that suggests that it needs to do it for the whole zone and not just for the project?
First.
The first one?
Yes, if you would.
That it was correct tonight.
in
So if
scope.
you agree with that, then they go and they put make their sign and they put it up there, and there's inspections along the way, and there's a process for that. And that would be your action, and that's an appealable action, but that would be your decision, and kind of move forward. Sign. That's what would happen if you affirmed the staff decision.
Okay, I guess my question would be, this is clearly a fraught issue. We have plenty of representation, lots of discussion. So if we vote in the negative, what would be the implication there?
So if you found that the appeal of the permit itself was timely and the classification was incorrect and either in limiting it to just the project as opposed to the whole zone or in general, if you reversed it, then it would go back. They would have to, based on the reasons why you reversed it, they would have to fix whatever. It just really depend on what your decision was. Said no, it is a timely appeal. They shouldn't have issued the permit because they classified it incorrectly or something. Then they would have to reclassify it and then reassess the permit based on a different classification.
Thank you.
Just we're kind of keeping our meeting going. Do we have any more questions for Mr. Evans before we open up for neighborhood or public comment?
And just a point of clarification, I understand that after that there is a chance for me to rebut or, provide any other comments towards the end. Is that the process that you'll be following?
Typically, we try to limit comments to kind of their prescribed section of the meeting. But that's the purview of the chair.
Okay, great. I just getting clarifications.
Yeah,
thanks.
sure. Thank you. Do we have a neighborhood chair? You're him. Oh, wow, that's convenient. I guess we'll open up then for public comment. So anyone who... Sure, if you'd like to, that'd be fine to come up now and state your name and I guess in this case, interest in the property. Generally, we're asking people to confine their comments in this section to about 2 minutes or so.
Given that he's the owner, I think we're okay giving him a
Go
little bit longer.
Dave Hunter from Silverado Management. I live in Orem. Just to clarify very quickly, though, we started working with the staff in March to get this building permit done. And all along, again, we haven't tried to cut any corners. We're not going behind anybody's back. We're doing it very transparently, very openly. We got to the point where the city said, okay, this what the concept is and what you guys are talking about will work. They issued the permit. We went and got the sign built. And the day that the permit was issued to go hang the sign, Paul went in and appealed or did something where they said, okay, hey, we're going to have to revoke the permit until we go to the planning commission and change it from this commercial to the North University zone, which is more applicable to what we're doing. So we went back to the planning commission, passed that unanimously. And then we were going to go get the sign. We had the cherry picker. We call it a cherry picker, just a big boom arm that, they're about $1,500 a day plus transport. Get everything up. It's all there. Then we get a call from the city again, said, hey, now it's being appealed to even a higher level. So we had to return the cherry picker, expense. And the sign is done. It's a backlit sign. It's an aluminum sign with backlighting. So it's not going to be a direct light blowing out onto the street. It's facing a church and a parking lot. And the lights are behind the actual sign. But I just want to tell you guys, we've done everything. We've bent over backwards to make this correct. In this housing shortage we're in, the neighborhood wants to take a full story off the building. As a developer, that's very hard to hear because that's actually how we make our money. But we had to take off a whole thing just to accommodate the neighborhood. We're next to the biggest stadium in the state, and they said the height is an issue. So we took off an entire story in this housing crisis that we have with students and everything else. And all that does is hikes up rents for everybody because now we can't maximize the site. It affects students. But we really have bent over backwards to make this work for this neighborhood. And we're getting to the end of our rope. It's just every time we turn around to try to accommodate, do something, we get smacked down again. And it's gone on long enough. So we would love it to come to a decision tonight so we can go get our sign done, get occupancy, get kids moved in. And that's what I have to say. And I'll be here till the end. So if there's any other questions for me, I'll be here. Tip your waiters. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comments, either here in the room or perhaps virtually? I'm not sure. Are we broadcasting virtually? Okay. Seeing none, I guess now we have an opportunity as a board to then we will converse amongst ourselves and see if we can figure out what decision we want to come to. Oh, verbally, see if I can do it publicly. But you can ask questions of staff as you need to for clarification. We can until we get there.
I am surprised that there is not a neighborhood representative. I understand that it's been challenging and there's always a tension between development, old city and new city, so to speak. And I certainly can appreciate the housing shortage and yet the amazing feel that Provo has as a single family neighborhood, many of the neighborhoods. So with that in mind, there are a lot of double negatives in the explanation of this, and I can understand that it's confusing. At least it's a bit confusing for me. Can the city address or can staff address when a permit such as this is issued? Clearly, I can appreciate no one's going to let a sign. It's just a building permit. Building is in construction, not a building you live in. So when that is issued, I do think it's a little bit whiplashy, for lack of a better term, issue a permit and then to rescind the permit. In the issuance of the permit on the 6th of June, it was put on hold only, not completely rescinded. Can you clarify that for me on the 7th?
Sure. I mean, I think the issuing part is pretty straightforward. I think initially, so in the Planning Commission bylaws, there are certain functions that are referred to staff. So the Planning Commission doesn't act on them unless somebody objects to what the staff did. So I think it was assumed that this was one of the referred functions to staff. And so they went and they just said, I think they classified it as most like a DT1. And then later was discovered, no, this actually isn't one of the, I think Mayor was pointed out that it actually isn't one of the referred functions. And so the Planning Commission does actually have to act on it directly. And so when that happened, they said, all right, we're going to put a hole in the permit. You guys weren't, don't install it, don't ask for inspections, the permit's on hold, so you can't act in furtherance of the permit. The legal status of that is still an issued permit. It's just that much like the appeal to the Board of Adjustment puts any action in furtherance of the permit on hold, so did that action of staff putting a hold on it. It's a very similar thing. And so it went to Planning Commission. The Planning Commission made its decision, and here we are. It was appealed by Mr. Evans.
Maria, questions?
As I've looked at the map where this project is located, being right in the center of different zones, it's difficult to classify exactly which zone it fits best in. And I can see, why the Planning Commission struggled with it. But in terms of trying to look at the characteristics of it and permitted uses of this project, and whether or not it should be permitted to be lit, have the name of the project on it and have that name be lit. I'm having a difficult time not finding an appropriate argument for allowing that. I'm not seeing why it allowed, and to me, I don't see reason if it's, call it the downtown zone, North University zone, but I don't see that it's impacting anybody negatively. And I think that one way or the other, the Planning Commission had to make a call, and I think they made the best call that they could, and I don't see that they erred in their final decision.
Okay. So maybe to kind of organize our decision making from this point, let's maybe get through these 2 points in turn. Let's just talk about timeliness. Timeliness. We have two kind of different starting or times when the clock was started, I guess, on two different things. One was the permit to build design, and then one was when that was, of course, put on hold, and then when that was properly decided, what the implications would be, what rules were going to be applied. That became known later, decided later. I guess that's the first question that I think we need to be clear on. Is this whole application timely? Are we comfortable?
I believe that given the information that's been shared with us and certainly the excellent write-up, I think that the permit, the permit was issued. I think that the developer did what they could to respond in a timely manner. I think that applying, well, we're so. But the question at hand, I would like the city to ask the question so we can answer a yes, no. There are so many, I don't know if you.
Go ahead.
How would the city ask the question so that we can vote aye or nay?
Okay, so the first question is, was the original permit, I guess the first issue you need to address on the first question. Let me back up. The first question is, was the permit issued in error? And the subsidiary question is, was that appealed timely? So you need to first address, did they appeal the issuance of the permit itself timely? And if the answer is no, then that's the end of it. question one. If the answer is yes, then you go on to consider the merits. Was the permit issued correctly? And then the second question is, when the planning commission took its action and then ultimately essentially modified the permit by applying a different zone classification to the permit, was that done correctly or was it done in error? There's no dispute that was appealed timely, and you would consider the merits of that question.
I'm ready to vote.
Maria, do you have any further questions? I do have a question. I know that this idea of what are valid points for us to consider and what are not have been something that has come up on a few occasions. But I guess what I'd like to understand is if this is an appeal to the decision by the Planning Commission and Mr. Evans' appeal, which came in by his account the day after that. So when was his window for that appeal to occur? Or if that's a moot point, help me understand why.
Okay, so when staff's position is that there are two separate windows to appeal here. So the original permit issuance, the window to appeal is when he had actual or constructive notice of the issuance of the permit.
Right.
There's documentary evidence that Mr. Evans knew of it no later than June 7th, the day after the permit was issued. There's emails.
So at that point, he knew that there was a permit issued to build that sign
no later than June 7th.
Okay.
And so that time to appeal that, our position would have run no later than June 21st.
Okay.
His appeal came on June 23rd. So our position is it's too late, it's untimely. Then the Planning Commission action, which modified the permit, that cannot be appealed separately. And so that appeal time started running on June 22nd when the Planning Commission took its action, and it was appealed timely on June 23rd. And so those are the two different issues that you're considering. And our position is that there are two different time periods for appeal that apply separately to each issue. If that makes any sense.
I think it does. I guess maybe where the step in my my logic and understanding here maybe is incomplete, maybe follows then. This appeal, from my understanding, is not to the first window, it's to the second.
Right. Well, he's appealing both actions, the issuance of the permit itself and the Planning Commission action.
Right.
So again, there's no dispute that the second issue that was appealed was timely.
Right.
And so you should consider the merits of that.
Right.
As to the first issue, again, there is a dispute as to the timeliness. And so you need to consider whether or not the time for appeal began running on June 7th on that or began running on June 22nd. And that's a decision that you would have to make.
I do have a question, even though I'm pretty confident. I'm confident about what my feelings on this are. If we vote no, what that means is that we feel that the appeal was issued in a timely fashion.
Right. So if you vote no, I guess no on what?
On the first issue.
If you say, was the permit issued in error and you say no.
Correct.
Then again, are you ruling on the merits or the timeliness issue? So you need to state specifically what you're ruling on.
No and yes. So I would assume that as a commercial developer who can figure out how to build that building, that all of the developers are very aware of timing and protocol. And so is there any room to assume that with the ongoing discussions with the building permit and amendments and modifications that come in after it is initially issued, that the developers assumed there was an open question and they were not running into a timeline.
The developers, again, I don't know what they were assuming. What they were told is don't take any further action in furtherance of the building permit until we go to planning commission and get the, how and if it needs to be modified, issue resolved.
But by then, in taking no further actions whatsoever, by then they ran out of their force. Is that accurate?
It's not the builder with the issue, it's the, no, but it's the neighborhood. The applicant is from the neighborhood saying, trying to stop
Right, Mr.
that permit from being acted upon.
Okay. When
Mr. Evans could have appealed it before the issuance of the permit itself, before the modification proceedings in the planning commission took place.
Yes, I think that I do understand take no further action. There's a take no further action with the permit and there's a take no further action with the building. I understand that.
Okay, so do you have
From the
any further
neighborhood's point of
questions?
view? Nope, I understand.
Okay.
Maria, thoughts, questions?
So if we were to say that that his appeal, that his application to apply actually fell on the 23rd, after the planning commission made their decision. Then we would have to decide whether or not the planning commission decision was an error or not, correct?
You would decide whether or not the planning commission act was an error regardless. The issue was the entire permit. Do you consider the entire permit or just the modification of the permit? So if you determine that the time began to run on the permit itself on June 7th, when Mr. Evans was aware of the issuance of the permit, then it's 14 days from that date. If you decide that the time for the issuance of the permit itself began to run after the planning commission took its action, then it would be 14 days from June 22nd. And then again, no matter what, you're going to have to decide the merits of the issue of whether or not the planning commission acted in error when it did.
So, I mean, I think, personally, I'm confident to say, in the timeliness issue that no, it was not timely to be able to appeal the whole permit, but that to be able to appeal more specifically, just the planning commission's act, that's valid. That's well within. And so we need to talk about whether or not the planning commission acted outside, of what they were permitted to do. I think some of that seems to be open to some interpretation. And Mr. Evans, what I take a lot of his concerns to be focused more on protecting due process. Then I didn't hear any reference to it's too bright, I'm not going to be able to sleep. It's want to keep the city honest and fulfilling. Maybe that's so to that second point then, planning commission, they make a mistake enough that we need to send it back. So one of the primary issues that this seems to hinge upon is whether or not the Planning Commission could speak in particulars. Could they choose, as they seem to take the North University Avenue standard and apply it to this particular sign? Or is their purview limited to simply being able to determine what standards will apply, in a particular zone? So less specifically. My logic and follow in understanding sound so far? So let's just again try, in the interest of kind of keeping things confined, let's talk about this particular versus whole zone issue. Are there issues there that we want to speak to?
What does city code instruct? I mean, does it give latitude to apply to a parcel versus an entire?
If Brandon wants to pull up the portion of his presentation that has the code there, yeah, that's what you're applying. That's what that's what Planning Commission applied, and that's what you're deciding whether they did that correctly.
But we were to understand that, determined that there had not been a suitable, classification, that had not happened, and so they needed to make a decision, and they made a decision which was, we are going to take that North University development standard, and we are going to apply it to this area. Is that correct?
Yeah, my understanding is the campus mixed use zone is not, it doesn't readily fit with any of the classifications that are up there.
Right.
And it also doesn't have its own sign code. It just refers you to Title 14, Chapter 38.
Right.
So they made a decision as to what they thought, based on, the similarity of characteristics and permitted uses that of those that are classified, and decided which one it was most like. And I think they decided upon, was it North University River Bottoms special? Yeah. So, and that is one that is in 1438. That is one that is specifically classified. So that's the action they took.
Where did this idea that they cannot apply to a specific parcel, but must only talk, in much more general terms than they did, where was that introduced? Or where is that maybe cited to?
Is that first in the
The applicant cited this section of code, saying that, citing this section, saying that limits the Planning Commission's purview to zoning districts and not particular properties.
And the city does not concur with that interpretation. Is that the idea?
No, staff's interpretation does
Sorry,
not
staff.
concur with that.
So it's an interpretive point here, not. Can staff point to any particular language here, or draw our attention to any particular language that that might be relevant, they feel particularly relevant in leaning one way or the other?
I think that when staff was reviewing this, it was through here, those zoning districts which do not have a sign regulation.
But can you define a district?
That's a very good question. We looked in we looked to see if that was a defined term, and it's not.
And so I'm not a lawyer. In the absence of a defined term, what's kind of standards?
Just a plain English definition.
Yeah.
You know, so that would be what you kind of base it on.
So, and this kind of the principle of kind of, so is that maybe then where this idea that using kind of, this kind of, remember the terminology that was used, by kind of that ordinary person, lay person, understand that.
I mean, it's kind of what the original public meaning is often a term used. What does it mean to the general person and the public? What do those words mean? Zoning district.
Get into like, the constitutional interpretive,
Right, but here we're interpreting an ordinance, but yeah.
Yeah, no, but still like philosophies, right? It's difficult for me to say that another body representing the city, could not decide that a district means something, of that size. Whether or not I agree with it, might be it could even be a different question. I would have to, it sounds like what we're being asked to say, at least on this particular point is, did they define an undefined term outside of what could be reasonable? I put a question mark at the end of that. Sorry.
Okay, so you're asking me whether
I guess
what they did was reasonable.
I'm just trying to narrow questions down here to kind of help us.
I mean, I don't.
Forward. Because and not
I don't know
whether
if
or not it was
a legal question.
Not whether it was reasonable. I guess what I'm asking, my question is, are we, as part of this, asking us to determine whether they were allowed basically to determine what that word meant? And then if they were, then is it so absurd what they decided it meant that it should be overturned?
So in the appeals to the board chapter, powers and duties section of the code, it talks about any officer, department, board, or bureau. Let's see. The applicant or any person or entity adversely affected by a decision administering or interpreting a provision within this title may appeal that decision, applying the provision by alleging there's an error in any order, requirement, decision, or determination made by an official in the administration or interpretation of the provision. So it's pretty broad as to what you're doing here. You're deciding whether or not an error was made in the interpretation of a provision.
And I guess I'm just trying to confine it
issue.
to that particular point for now. Like,
Yeah.
Did they err in determining what a district is in order to, somehow that their scope was wrong?
Right. It asks you to consider whether there was an error. And so it's, it doesn't specify like what the standard of review is in determining that error. Like many things in the law in particular, it would be nice if we could do things perfectly and anticipate every question in advance, but it doesn't actually specify the standard of review. Often what you're dealing with are going to be, questions that involve interpreting the law and applying the facts to the law. Whether or not this seems to be more of like a legal, interpretation, like more, you're reviewing whether or not they interpret the law correctly, not whether or not they did ascertain the facts correctly.
Sure.
So I mean, I think you have probably more of a free hand to, substitute your judgment for theirs if you think differently than what they thought.
Sure. Yeah, and just this may, those members of the public who haven't kind of sat through one of these meetings before, it may seem that because we have, this type of 3 of these kind of, appeal type decisions tonight, that they're common. That's not the case. And so there is a certain learning curve that the board is undertaking, and I appreciate your patience. Other members of the board, thoughts on this particular, scope, question, interpretation of district, or others that are relevant before we feel like we're confident that we can make a decision and move on from the item?
I'm not sure how to phrase this. Legal, professional terms. But my thoughts are that I think that where the problem may lie is that the Planning Commission's decision affected a single property and wasn't a citywide decision. And I'm not faulting them for that. That wasn't the.
In some ways, that's always going to be the case, because some undescribed or assigned zone is going to have one property that tests the waters first.
Right. Well, that wasn't the decision that was being, they were being asked to make that night. They weren't being asked to approve a change to city code that would affect the city wide. They were just being asked to approve this one item on an agenda. And, but in retrospect, it, while it had the appearance of affecting just a single property, it affects more than just one property. It affects multiple properties across the city and properties that aren't even being built yet.
So I guess you're saying that, to make sure I understand, that, for example, this hypothetically, the next developer comes along, buys, the property across the street, builds something very much similar. They de facto did, already decide that. The staff could just make that decision. It wouldn't have to go back to them again.
Right. I think what's going to happen now is that staff is going to have to take a look at this ordinance and look and see if they want to leave it as it's written, where, potentially, city council, or I'm sorry, planning commission will have to make this sort of decision in the future. Or if they want to, if staff wants to propose a change to city ordinance, and then planning commission will have to approve, not approve, change the language of city code. But unfortunately, the planning commission kind of got in a position here where they were being asked to approve a change, or change, I guess you could say, to the signage requirement, and it's affected one project, but it ultimately affects many projects, and it's across the city. So did they err in making this one decision? I hate to say yes, because they were in a difficult position and I don't think they erred in their decision. I think it was the right decision as far as the city goes. That for an answer.
Thoughts, questions?
No, I definitely agree. I think, we're not here to set precedent but when this vote will certainly set for other projects. Progress marches on. So yes, Maria, that is going to happen. So I agree with.
Just going to give, in respect to kind of due process and that, I think before we vote, I do want to acknowledge that, Mr. Evans' kind of opening point tonight when he presented, essentially saying that he was given one staff report and that what was presented by staff tonight was quite different. Why don't I say opposite? Should he want to request a continuance, as he mentioned that he might, is that something that we would need to consider or should consider? The idea of just fairness.
You would have the option of deciding issue 1 and continuing issue 2, because issue 1 was nothing changed about
Well,
that.
so why don't we go ahead then, and will someone give me a motion for issue 1, and then we can decide, and maybe we'll even ask Mr. Evans if he would like to request a continuance on issue 2. Grant that, and
He gave the thumbs up, so
here he comes.
Thank you. Yes, there's a number of issues that I think the board would benefit from clarifying, and they are related to this change that occurred suddenly in the staff position about interpretation of things. And I would like the opportunity to be able to address those in a fair way. So yes, a continuance would be appreciated. And also associated with this is the issue. The issue's never been the sign in this appeal. We're just saying, look, the process by which we got here is important. And there's some steps along the way that we missed. We ought to do this the correct way so that it's all ultimately transparent, and we can get arrive at a good decision. We may arrive at the same decision as we did before, but we'll get there the correct way. And that's what the basis for this appeal is to say, look, there's a number of procedural issues that occurred, and we just need to remedy those. And if we can go back to the Planning Commission, we can have a hearing on it, we can do it the right way, then we can move forward. So, but give us a chance to appeal, or a chance to at least consider what the staff's change and recommendation is. And as you addressed, what was the basis for the change in that decision? I'd like to have that laid out. I've tried to lay out the reasoning as best as I could. My documentation, I'd like to see the same from city staff.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I don't, I hate the idea of having to kind of hang up development and a developer on red tape, but I also do, empathize with Mr. Evans' point that fairness and due matter. Sure, and then we will close comment.
And Dave Hunter, when the permit got taken back off the table, they wanted us to go do it correctly, like Paul did. So we went back to the Planning Commission. It was a full open setting. I mean, the whole community got to show up. The whole entire neighborhood showed up, again, yelled all the insults at us and insulted the planning commission to the point where they had to shut it down. It was really a crazy meeting. But we did all of that to get to do it correctly. So that's why we came back and spent the time and spent the hours to come back and do it correctly. And the planning commission recognized that we were there to do it correctly and set the correct zone and the correct application to it. And so we've spent all the time to do that and do it correctly and get it modified. And now the building is empty. We don't have 240 kids are going to be living there. If we continue this and have to go put up a sign with all the heavy equipment when the entire building is full in 3 weeks or in a month or in 2 months, that'll be a major inconvenience for a lot of people. And if Paul's not opposed to the sign, I say this is something that we get the sign voted on so we can go hang the sign when there's nobody there and we have the equipment out there. And then the city and the staff can go back and modify this on their time when it's appropriate and everything else. But to make us wait at this point, when there's not an objection to the sign or the light, nobody's objecting to that. They're objecting to what the process was. We've gone through the exact correct process and done everything the city's asked us. And if there's some language that needs to get corrected, that'd be great if we could do it when there's not 240 students in our building and we have the equipment out there right now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
More conversation that we need to have before. So on the first, let's vote on the first item, and then I want to ask a quick question in a second. That to rest. Always the question, right? So I move that the staff was correct in finding that the appeal to the original permit was not timely. Is there additional language that needs to be included from a legal standpoint?
I think that's adequate to your motion.
Wait a second.
I second that.
All right. First. Okay. So that issue is settled. Now, where are we sitting on the second one?
Well,
Oh, that's the question. Because there is a motion that we could make that motion to continue it. I think there's a case to be made for continuing it. I do think there is a case to be made. I mean, I know I'm going to sound like I'm of two minds, and that's not untrue. We could say essentially because of this kind of last minute shuffle by staff tonight, that fact alone necessitates that we allow Mr. Evans' request for continuance, or we can say, de facto, there's no objection to the sign. Let's let things go forward because, and if there are problems with the way it happened, the fairness of it, the process of it, there are other venues to take that up and make sure that this are improved.
I'm not. See. We were told at the beginning that our only actor tonight was to decide if Provo City Planning Commission acted in error. Staff, I may need some help here. Let's see, how can I word this? Can I just ask for a continuance, or should I, because I have very mixed feelings about whether or not planning committee really committed an error. I feel that perhaps that, as I stated before, that, you know, they made a decision based on a single project, but that this was something that's actually going to go, you know, needs to be applied citywide, and perhaps the city code needs to reflect that and not make necessarily a something that needs to be decided by the planning commission. So I'm hesitant to say that they did anything wrong. See what I'm saying? And so I'm not sure how to word this.
Okay, your available options are, you could, in deciding what motion to make, you could decide it tonight, and you can make a motion to affirm what staff did, planning commission did. You could reverse it and make a motion to say, no, it needs to go back to planning commission. They need to go through that process and do it correctly. That's an option. Or you could defer it. You could make a motion to continue the matter as has been requested. Those are all available options. It is possible to defer deciding to another date to give Mr. Evans the opportunity. It's also possible to decide it tonight if you think, no, he presented his case. We think we have a grasp of the issues that we're being asked to decide, and then make a decision one way or the other.
Okay, if we make a motion for continuance, it just comes back to this body, back to
Yeah, I'll
the
just come
Board
back
of Adjustment.
here in a month, and then you would decide the second issue then.
Okay. So basically, whether or not planning commission made an error.
Correct.
Okay.
I'll tell you where I'm leaning. I think that it is regrettable that the staff report pivoted the way it did. And I think there might be reason for conversation about that, but I don't think there's any outcome that essentially where this is going to lead to that sign not being put up. So I don't see a need to create this, artificial barrier for the developer. Because of this issue, I don't think information would come to us that would change so much that it's worth
Reviewing this again.
Well, extending this, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, when we can allow the developer to put up a sign, and then in appropriate venues, if people want to talk about process, want to talk about fairness, want to talk about how this could, those can happen elsewhere.
You expressed what I'm feeling succinctly. I think if it's not about, if at the end of the day, the end result is going to be that sign on that building, I agree with everything that you said. And I am loath to be part of slowing down development when at the end of the day, it is going to affect our community. If we can be part of a solution. And let's take a look at the progress. I don't like the pivot either. That can be addressed separately from this.
And I mean, let's vote. A motion?
Okay, so I'm going to ask for some guidance in the wording so that it is appropriately reflects what we just both mentioned. And Maria, you're perfect. So I want to put forth a motion from the Board of Adjustments that I want you to help me out on that. That the Provo City Planning Commission did not act in error in their review and classification of the sign for section 14.38.110 Provo City Code for an apartment building in the CMU campus mixed use zone located at 1902 North Canyon Road.
So you're making a motion that the planning commission did not act in error.
Correct.
You would call for a second.
I'll second.
Okay.
Aye.
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 So with that, the issue is decided and the planning commission's decision holds. Mr. Evans, I am grateful for you and others like you who work very hard to keep processes honest and thereby make processes better, more transparent, more fair. So thank you. With that, let's move on to our second item.
Board, if we could we take a short break for our technology to
It has been
refresh?
almost 2 hours. So let's break for, how long do we need?
5 minutes. I think they just need to reset the computers.
Okay, let's say on the, we'll come back on the hour.
I'm too short. Am I lower? I know. We need this. I can't see anybody. These are just putting. Learning here is.
Go.
makes the rest of this a little easier. It's by itself, so yeah.
All right, I think we are on the hour, so if people want to get ready for our second item. All right, staff ready to go? Okay, great. So our second item of the evening is as follows. I hope someone will correct me on my pronunciation of this name later, but item 2 is Rachel Whoolery has filed an appeal to the Board of Adjustment to dispute the legal use of property at 427 West, 400 South in the R1.61 family residential zone, Franklin neighborhood. I will pass the floor to staff for their report. Thank you. Do we have any questions from the board for staff? Right, neither do I. So let's, do we have Larry here or her representative? You just state your name.
Okay. I'm Rachel Whoolery, and I'm here requesting the status of legal non-conforming two-family dwelling be granted to 427 West, 400 South. The Groneman family owned Groneman Construction, and they decided that they wanted rental investment properties for themselves. So in 1949, they built 2 sets of almost identical duplexes next to each other. That's the 427 and then the 441 and 439. So those are both built by the Groneman Construction, the family, and they built them at the same time, and they are almost identical. They sold the 1 duplex, and then they kept the 427 for their family. And that one went on and got their duplex status, and that was fine. The 427, they were renting it until Frances moved back into town with her daughter, and she was a single mom. So she moved into that house. And then after her mother, Thelma, so her father had died, her mother died, Thelma, in 1991. And then that house was given to Frances. And then she's lived there until she died of COVID, January 4th, 2022, this year. So she was disabled early in life in a car accident in 1976 and desperately poor for her entire life. Due to the car accident, she had large pieces of her leg missing. And so she had trouble walking, she had trouble working. She was a teacher, and that career ended, and she was in pain until the day she died. She gave piano lessons to all the neighbors, and that was buying food. So her last year's taxes, she lived on 10,000 gross. So she was poverty for forever. This is verified by 3 Provo neighborhood loans that she received, one in the 90s, and then one about 15 years ago, and then one more recently. And all these loans were when her roof was leaking, her water main broke, her kitchen was flooding. These are like dire needs, and she had not a penny to fix them. So the city stepped in and then put a lien on the house. So also her utilities were subsidized. So like I can verify that she was in poverty for all of those years. She wanted to finish the duplex. So when her duplex was finished in 1949, it had all the stub outs, it had some walls, it had electricity, it had the sewer and the water down there for the kitchen and the bathroom. It just, it wasn't finished to the last step to be able to be inhabited. So when the city of Provo decided unilaterally to like create a new zone and then set it over these houses that were all built between 1925 and 1955, a lot of them were built as duplexes, and 3 on the blocks. So on my same block, there's 3 of these that are legal duplexes, including on each side of me. So that side, and then across the street. And then across the street over here is a duplex, but it's currently just one family living in it. I brought a friend of Frances's who's 90 years old and has been friends with Thelma and Frances since 1949. And so she can give you an explanation about, she can both verify Frances's desire to have a duplex and the wish that she could have made that, but her circumstances did not enable her to have that. And she also can verify that the house was built as an investment by this family and was used as a rental investment, and they did not live in it until Frances was moved in it. On the 427 West and 458 West, so we have 3 duplexes official. That's 408, 419, 388, 414, and 441, 439. And then 427 West and 458 West were both originally built as duplexes. I lived in 458 West as a duplex 22 years ago. That's how I met Frances, 23 years ago. So, and then my sister lived there after, and it was always used as a duplex. So this particular block is rentals. Out of all of the other 4 remaining houses, 3 are rentals and 1 is owner occupied. With the housing crisis currently happening for community housing in Provo, we want to provide 2 new units to the community that have been completely updated. And when I say updated, we started with just clearing out of debris, and we ended with all the wires were black, and I can't believe that they did not burn earlier. We had to take out everything, all the way down, all the mold, all the rats, everything that was there. We cleared it, and it has continued to get down till we're now at the beginning stages, and everything's back to 2022 standards. So we're putting 4 off-street parking stalls, a new roof, landscaped, and making it an ideal place because we have Franklin Park right there, Franklin Elementary. It's 4 blocks from Main Street, so it's an ideal location for a walkable community. As we look at the current use of the property, it's true that Frances was unable to rent out her basement despite her desire to do that, but the use of that entire area is rentals. And I know that as we have a need for housing and the housing ends up being built new, The cost of construction, it requires these new units, even if they're one bedroom, to be like $1,700. I have a daughter who just got married and they've been searching for housing for like 5 months. And it's been really, really difficult and everything's out of their price range. So when you look at older houses that have been remodeled, now you're starting to talk about like a 900 to a 1,200 instead of a 14 to a 1,700. So it gets it back into the realm of a family being able to afford a 2-bedroom house. So we'd have 2 of those units. And we just asked for the same grandfathered rights as our neighbor to the east and to the west and across the street. As we look at where infrastructure can grow in order to handle the housing crisis, it just ends up having to stretch further and further. And you have to bring the water and the sewer and the garbage, and everything stretches out because the center of city has already been developed. It already has all the houses. And so the idea of being able to look at some of these older properties that predated when you put the new zone on it, and they said, okay, this was built as a duplex, as a separate entrance. It meets all the qualifications. This is a way that you can get additional units and put them in a walkable area for people to address this housing crisis. Let's see. I, along with 3 of Francis Groneman's granddaughters, currently own the house. Frances had neither the means nor the technological acumen to understand when she had a certain amount of time to either apply for grandfather status or to do something about it. She had no idea. I can't tell you the amount of times that we tried to help her use her phone over the phone, which is really hard to get someone to unlock their screen while you're talking them through it. So there's just, we assume that the elderly are able to meet deadlines and apply for the right things, and that's just not the case for Francis. The house was built as an investment property, and we're asking that we get the grandfather status of a legal, non-conforming 2-family dwelling.
I do. You mentioned you have plans to increase the parking. I can see that it's just a little driveway with no covered parking.
Yep.
So I have 2 questions, one for you and one for staff. You mentioned you have plans to increase parking to 4 off street. Can you walk through how that would happen?
Sure. So we have one straight ahead all the way to the back of the backyard. And right now that is just rubble, debris, and it was chickens. So, yep. So we're putting in landscaping. So we have one going straight, and then we're putting a parking lot going this way. Right. And so we'll have a little landscape buffer between, I actually have a picture. Do you want a picture? Okay. So anyway, so there's three or 4 stalls on this way and then one going forward. And then I'll just, the rest is little, there'll be grass and an L shape around the parking lot. Yeah.
It's difficult to tell from that photo. Does the neighbor there already have a paved backyard?
Next to me, that one.
Other side.
The other side,
That one.
that way. Yeah, we're seeing the exact opposite.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, they have parking in front.
And
Like,
then
They have a
other
parking
one
pad there. Yeah. Yeah. So,
in 419.
yeah. So they have enough parking stalls, but their driveway is just wider. And so I don't know if they have any access coming in the back. I just know that their driveway, they repaved it, and they park right next to, so that white car on ours, that's where our driveway is. And then right next to it, their driveway goes like too long. And then there's like a 3rd and a 4th. Yeah, I think that's their.
Okay,
parking.
to ensure that I understand then, just
Mhm.
because we were looking at the opposite.
Yeah.
The parking would be one along the long way where the white vehicle is at this time, along the back, and then turning to provide additional parking in the back.
Correct. So just basically, it'll be a concrete pad making a flag, upside down flag shape.
Got it.
So, okay.
Okay.
And then there'll be grass along the peripheral, yep, on the west, and then by the house. Yep.
All right, and then for Mr. Draper, is that kind of parking immediately adjacent to the other property within code? Is that something that would pass?
Is that satisfied current parking standards? So the parking in the driveway would not satisfy current parking standards because it doesn't lead to covered parking. So you're talking about anything in the rear yard that could potentially be made to satisfy current parking standards, but nothing in the front yard where you would normally see a driveway, and where there's a driveway there could be considered legal parking under today's standards.
Is there a way that you could create parking, the required parking for 4?
Yeah.
Covered or uncovered, whatever it's supposed to be?
Yeah, I just liked a little landscape buffer between the stalls, but it doesn't matter. Can you pull up my application for my building permit? It has the parking in there. Yeah, can I give you a picture? You can't add anything. Okay, how about this? I will show you, but yes. So I've already submitted it to the building permit group, and it meets the landscape standards and the parking standards of 4 stalls without requiring any cars to be in front of each other in a driveway. They're 4 unique stalls.
So before I know if I,
Oh, okay, thanks.
or,
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
it's okay,
this is one of them. And the other one was I was putting a landscape buffer, but this is also, I mean, it shows that there's enough for 20 by 9 and 4 stalls equally fit in that backyard. So
That might have problems with lot coverage. There's only about 50% of the rear yard could be covered with the asphaltic cement required for legal parking, and that doesn't meet that standard under the zone.
I'm sorry, it does not meet that standard?
Right. I mean, that appears to be covering well in excess of 50% of the backyard.
So it doesn't have to curve that much. It doesn't have to have that banking. It also doesn't have to have a back rear end. Like it could, that whole corner could be landscaped. Like I'm willing to meet standards to make a parking lot that works. I have enough property to work with. It's just, this was our first. I didn't know about.
I do think we're running a little bit of
that's what I was gonna
afoul
ask.
of what we're
Scope,
here about
please.
tonight.
Thank you.
What we're here about tonight is determine whether or not there's a non-conforming use that exists. And so whether or not that what she's going to do if it is determined that she does have a non-conforming use is really not what is before you tonight. So it probably makes sense to try to keep it focused on whether or not she can meet the standard that the use existed before the change in the zone, and it has been continued without abandonment since then.
So for a duplex, you have to have separate entrances that can't be in the front of the yard. This one was built with a separate entrance from the side yard, which you can do side and back. Side goes straight down to the basement with its own entrance. So it meets that. It meets the egress. We're putting in 3 egress windows to make sure that that fits code. So all of the codes will be met. And we've updated everything, but it was all there. So she just used it for storage, and that was from lack of ability to do this today.
So just so that I understand the standard to be applied here, Mr. Draper, you just mentioned that, was it essentially that, was this a duplex, and in order for it to, that status to be maintained, you're saying that it has to have continued to be used as such, exist as such? What's the standard?
So the standard is, right, was the use legally, were somebody legally doing that use at the time of the zone change? That's the first thing you're considering.
And what year was the zone
It was
change?
originally zoned in 1949 under what was then called an R3 zone, which would have permitted the duplexes you see in the neighboring houses. At some point subsequent to that, it was rezoned in what we currently call an R1 zone, and it's kind of a subclassification within that is R16, which just talking about the 6 just means it's 6,000 square foot lots. or, 0.14 acres approximately. And that is a minimum lot size thing. But the R1 is the zone itself. And the R1 zone obviously is single family housing is allowed and multifamily housing is not allowed, other than accessory apartments would be allowed in the R16. But those have to be owner occupied. So the question is, was it being used as a two-family dwelling, non-owner occupied two-family dwelling at the time of the zone change? And has that use continued since then? If a person wasn't using it as a multifamily dwelling for at least a year under Provo City Code, there's a presumption that grandfathered use was abandoned. So so the first question is, was it being used as a two-family dwelling before the zone change? And then the second question is, if the answer to that question is yes, did that use continue or was it abandoned? And if the person living there had used it as a one-family dwelling for at least a year and not a two-family dwelling, then there's a presumption of abandonment in the Provo City Code.
So that grandfathered use is quite fragile then, shall we say?
Yeah, it's non-conforming. The law is that's a single-family zone right now, with the possibility of accessory apartments if you meet the standards in the code. But recognizing that people have vested interest and that there's constitutional takings issues with taking away those vested interests, people can continue those non-conforming or grandfathered uses as long as they keep doing it. But if you abandon it, then you're subject to the current law.
So then, Whoolery, can you speak to this kind of abandonment question, or kind of this continuance over time?
Sure. She was a single mom, disabled, and would have loved to have had the income of a basement apartment. And I brought her 90-year-old friend to tell you their conversations with Francis. So I would say that if she had ever had the financial means to get that secondary income, that would have been a game changer for her. But there's no loan for the poor, and there's no ability for her to have access to that. So I'm saying that the desire was there, the build was there, but her poverty prevented her from getting the use that she wanted out of the house. And so we're holding her against her.
Sure. And I'm I hate these because I'm a social worker. I get it. There you go. And yet I don't see, it's kind of where I'm at. I'm not sure I see a way to do this. But let's go through. Let's let anyone who does want to speak, let them speak, and then we'll kind of see where things are at. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And we'll open up for public comment.
I'm Nancy Hugo. I live one block north and one block east. So I'm a block and a half away from Francis's house. We have lived in the neighborhood since 1974. And since we bought our house, we have been fighting hard to strengthen the owner-occupied homes in our neighborhood, to build a stronger, healthier neighborhood by having owner-occupied homes and owners that were there taking care of their homes. One of the biggest victories that we have achieved in this fight is the zoning that we currently have, so that except for homes that were non-owner occupied at the time, in order to the houses have to be owner occupied or owner occupied with an accessory apartment. There have been people in our neighborhood who, because we achieved this great zone that has strengthened our neighborhood so much, that have been in awkward situations. An example is Lee-Ling Jones. When Lee-Ling was widowed, she bought the house across the street from her with the idea that, since it had been a duplex, that her son could live in one apartment and she could rent out the other apartment. She was not allowed to because the owner was not living in the house. And she came up with a solution that worked for her by giving her son the house. So that now that he's the owner, he can live in half and rent out half. We are getting a little bit older. We still have years left, I hope. I hope it's more than 10 years before we're in the situation where we're looking at, do we need to move to an assisted living or something? We would not be able to do that and rent out our house. Our house is big enough. Our house is 2,400 square feet. So we would be able to build an apartment in the basement. In fact, we have, when we dug out the basement, we did preliminary work so that we would have an outside entrance and we would have plumbing for a kitchen. But if we were to move to an assisted living, we could not change our house into a duplex and rent it out as a two-place unit because as owners, we would not be living there. And we have known this and agreed with it because of how hard we worked to build owner occupancy in our neighborhood. We recognize the housing issue. We've got children that have looked for housing in Utah County. But we are so thankful that our neighborhood is strong enough and has stayed strong enough through the years that we can live there as a family. It is wonderful to see children in the neighborhood outside playing. That was not the case in 1974 when we bought our house. We have a healthy neighborhood and we need to keep it healthy. And if that means we sometimes have to make hard decisions and say, we'll follow the current zoning that we've worked hard to get, then I think we have to stick with that zoning and abide by it.
Thank you.
So that's my comment for today.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Are there other public comments? Okay, thank you. And we do ask for time's sake that we, concise.
My name is Lee Evans. I live directly to the east of Francis' house. I'm the next door neighbor. Corner lot. I just want to validate that when most of the homes on our block are owner occupied, we built our home 6 years ago. It has a garage apartment, but we are owner occupied, so it's an accessory apartment. So it's not accurate that most of the homes are being rented as legal duplexes currently. Most of them, 80% plus, are all owner occupied. So what Nancy said, it's very much becoming a family neighborhood. I can also, got to know Frances over the years, can validate her house was definitely not set up to be would need a lot of work to become a duplex, and it was rented as a single family unit from the beginning.
Others would like to speak. Just what everything you got to say.
A duplex. Father built them, we built one just.
Sure. I think that's helpful. Thank you. And you have a wonderful cane, by the way. I quite like your cane.
Yeah, I got it. I thought I could pick up some more
Yeah.
for my cane.
Thank you. Any others who would like to make public comment this evening on this issue? With that, we will close the public comment portion of our meeting and open our operations. Thoughts, questions?
Well, I just wanted to tell Ms. Whoolery that Frances sounds like a wonderful woman and who had a really tough life. Sounds like she really suffered a lot, but she was a strong person who persevered. And so, you know, I didn't know her, but I'm glad that I got to hear about her. And to those who spoke about their neighborhood, I am familiar with the struggles that Franklin neighborhood has seen over the years, and the strides they've made to work with the city and change zoning, and seeing the turnaround in their neighborhood from having a lot of rentals and seeing a lot of the rentals be converted to owner occupied with accessory apartments. And I'm seeing the code the way it is now. I'm afraid that the house in the current zone, that it's unable to regain its grandfathered status to be made into a duplex. But it is in a zone where if it's owner occupied, it could be made into, it can have an accessory apartment downstairs. And so the ability to have extra income is still there. You know, the work isn't lost, you know, having the plumbing and the electrical and all that stubbed in, you know, isn't for naught. You'd still have to put in the parking and all of that, the off-street parking, but, you know, you wouldn't have a duplex, but you'd still be able to have an income earning situation there as long as it's owner occupied. It sounds like the house, because of Francis's situation, you know, has fallen on hard times, and in that a lot of improvements need to be made. But it sounds like you've got some great neighbors who like to see those improvements made, and I bet you've got, you know, some willing hands around there.
My comment would be the house has never been legally. Is that correct, Ms. Whoolery? Although the family understood it was built as such. You certainly, I think, brought up some excellent points and microphones, so I'm going to concur with you. But I think that there is a severe lack of affordable and walkable rentals in Provo. Well, obviously, we have a beautiful city. It's very popular, and we don't have enough housing for everyone who wants to live here. Pricing in real estate in general is staggeringly difficult, but even more so for those who rent, and especially our younger community members. We have an obligation as older members to try and take care of them. I think that some of the guidelines and some of the regulations that we are all under create a community of the haves and the have-nots. That being said, I respect a neighborhood's feel and what the neighborhood wants the neighborhood to be, and it's the neighborhood who gets to decide what that neighborhood is. I think that when you have a situation where a home has been emptied out of 8 tons of trash, that is, at that point, the person in that home can't think their way into, I'm going to build an apartment. And I can see that you're agreeing that is a hard situation. I think all of us want to be able to make that house what the family intended it to be, but without the original use and without a more compelling argument. For example, the neighborhood wanting it to be converted. I am having a hard time justifying going against what the neighborhood has embraced ever since the house was built.
I agree. I think it's whatever status it may have had. It's going to be. I don't see a means by which we could say that the grandfathering requirements have been. So we are not the body with the authority to questions that would have to be answered or change. That do we have a
I'll make a motion that we deny that Ms. Whoolery's appeal to this board to dispute the legal use of property at 427 West, 400 South in the R16 one family residential zone in the Franklin neighborhood.
I'll second it. I'm in favor of agreeing with staff and
Aye.
Aye. So with that, we have a unanimous approval of that motion and the appeal denied. I believe the original third item on our agenda tonight was continued. So we are on to our fourth and final item, which reads as follows. Lindsay Stott is appealing the issuance of a building permit for property at 80 West Marrcrest South in the R18 PD zone, Riverside neighborhood. The floor over to staff for their report.
Thank you.
And if I can request that in your report or towards the end of your report, you really help us make sure we are very on these questions.
Yes, thank you. I think that I was already kind of get there for you at the beginning, actually. So I just wanted to do a quick summary to start off. On this one, the building permit for an addition at 80 West Marrcrest South was issued on January 25th, 2022. And an appeal was made on July 19th, 2022, that the building permit was issued in error. Staff report, as you can see on the screen, asks two questions of the board. Is the appellant's request to appeal timely? And the second question, if so, has the appellant shown that the permit was issued in error? Now, for the sake of time, I would suggest that we start by just focusing on the first question and maybe have all the parties speak to the first question alone and make a decision on that. Because if that is not the case, then the rest of it would not be something for this board to review.
I'm comfortable with that approach.
Okay. So that's all. I'll hold the rest of my presentation to after that then.
Is Lindsay Stott or their representative here? Okay, fair enough.
I am Scott Smith and I represent the HOA. Go ahead.
Speak into the
Sorry,
microphone.
sorry,
Please.
I'm a little taller than. First of all, thank you all for being here and taking the time on volunteer basis. Really is very by everybody involved. Thank you staff as well. I know they've spent some helping their report and to address the first issue is whether it's timely or not. No, the Marrcrest community was notified of this building permit until construction began on July 5th. July 5th is the first time we had constructive notice of this building permit. We filed the appeal July 19th, exactly 14 days after that constructive notice. So it's our position that the appeal is timely based on constructive notice of the permit. So that I think we could address the mayor.
Yeah, I appreciate that concise description. I think it's good. Do we have questions for your last name? Sorry,
Scott Smith.
On to.
I think it would be appropriate to hear from Mr. Boyle's attorney as well on this
Sure,
issue. I think he would
if
like to
you wanna give
present.
him an opportunity to comment on it, for sure.
Let's.
Hi, name's Randy Jeffs. Practice at Jeffs and Jeff. Thank you for your volunteer time and for the opportunity to talk about this. Yeah, I actually wanted to bring up another issue. We didn't know who Lindsay Stott was. I have no idea. Paralegal. That raises a standing issue. Not a resident of Provo. Still on a building permit. So that's an issue that should be addressed. The secondary issue on timeliness is the allegation that we just heard that the first notice that they had was construction. That's just not accurate. So it's true that construction started on the 5th of July and that they brought their appeal 14 days later. However, the president of the Marrcrest HOA was informed of the building permit and the intent to end construction on the 27th of June, which is a little over a week before that. So assuming that Ms. Stott is making this appeal on behalf of the Marrcrest HOA, which is apparently, reading through their documents, that done this on behalf of the HOA. Well, the HOA president, they were given notice on the 27th of June. I have permission to approach the members of, have copies of the email president of the HOA notice on the 27th, please. Right. It says, Mr. Boyle, I spoke with Mr. Boyle on Monday, June 27th, about his extension. The extension is the garage extension that he's constructing. That's the building permit. I asked if he had a building permit, and I said he did. I said, great. All right, so we have that there. So I think on the timeliness issue, it just comes down to that issue that their appeal is not timely. We have other issues that questions for me?
I don't. Other members of the board? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
It may be true that they notified the president of the board. President never brought it to the attention of the other board members. There's no indication that the other board members were involved in this notice. There's, to be completely frank with the board, this has been an ongoing issue for several. I'm very contentious with. There's feelings involved, alliances created. It's been an issue in the community, and I think a lot of people involved would try to get this resolved as quickly as possible. And in with, none of the other board members were notified of this notice. Members of the community first were notified when construction was dug on July 5th. July 19th, exactly 14 days later. Our position went that we had constructive notice. On the 5th, we filed the appeal 14 days later.
Are there members of the public who would like to make a brief statement? Seeing none, Ying Wan. I don't blame you. It's late.
John Max, and I'm in Marrcrest, and what procedure that Marrcrest homeowners say that two things I've been. Also
I
had
am so sorry, but can I have you move the microphone?
Oh, okay.
Thank you so much.
You betcha.
I want to hear every word.
No problem. So I'm kind of familiar with homeowners associations, and I've also been a member of a homeowners association in Florida. Florida is a little bit more legal than they are in Utah. And of course, probably in the last 20 years, Utah has tried to catch up as far as the statutes are concerned. That being said, I've been on the board probably back in the 70s, 80s, and whatever. And the governing document is the CCNRs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions. And they're in that particular document. It says that there would be an architectural committee, which has expired in 1998, January. The project started in 1968. So the developer thought that by 30 years, all the lots would have been sold, 74 of them, and that all the buildings would be built. So that expired. However, in two more articles in that, the architectural committee has expired. And that was article, I think, 6. I have a copy of that. But there's a subsequent article 7 and 8 and whatever. It said if there's new construction, building and whatever, there's a procedure to be followed. Provo City has followed that procedure. In other words, when somebody wanted to build, they would go to the board of the homeowners association, submit their plans and whatever, get approval and go through the process. Once they signed off to it, then it went to Provo City. Provo City always wanted to sign off from the board because it's a community. That being said, then Provo City would issue the necessary permit, that being followed and whatever. In this case, I don't think that was followed. The board is still active, and the governing document is the CCNRs, period. They didn't go away. They didn't expire. They're ongoing. So it's necessary to move forward in this particular issue.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Can staff speak to any legal standing or what implication any of these conversation of HOA documents and procedures?
Sure. HOA documents are the governing documents, the CCNRs. Those are essentially treated as like a private contract between the various homeowners. And so that's a private dispute that doesn't concern the city. So if somebody did something in violation of the CCNRs, then one of the neighbors could potentially sue that person for violating the CCNRs, but that's a separate issue that's not before you.
Right.
So whether or not what is the permit issued for actually violates the CCNRs, if it does or doesn't, is an issue that can be sorted out amongst the private parties and it really doesn't concern the Board of Adjustment. The Board of Adjustment is really concerned with the building permit that was issued and the question of whether or not that complies with law. No, so with the city law and with any applicable state or federal law, as the case may be. So that's what our consideration is. And the first issue is, again, was the appeal done timely? And so I think you need to make a factual determination. Did they have actual knowledge before July 5th of the existence of the permit? Because and again, Ms. Stott, it sounds like, was acting on behalf of the HOA's attorney, which means that she could have only been appealing on behalf of the HOA. So if the HOA knew about it, the permit before July 5th, then more than 14 days would have elapsed by the time they appealed, at which point I would say it's untimely.
Thank you. And I didn't formally close public comment. So any other, I'll go ahead and do that. Yeah. And I, I have no doubt that there are issues to be sorted out. However, I don't know that we have any purview other than to say those who were notified, who were responsible for notifying, did their due diligence in notifying the chair. The chair seems to have failed to have notified their board, but that seems beyond our purview. But yes, thoughts, comments from the board, questions from the board?
Well, I have some comments that perhaps were additional comments.
Please.
I think if it's written, it exists. If it doesn't written and it isn't, yes, go ahead.
Flo is not here to make a comment on the notice that was purportedly given to her. This email was also made yesterday. I find that highly suspect that she had notice on June 27th of this permit when the hearing is today and this email was conveniently crafted yesterday. I'll just leave the board with that to consider and
Thank you.
Sure.
I think we do need to close public comment. I appreciate your willingness, but approach.
Can you just state your name for the record?
My name's Cameron Boyle. I own the property at 80 Marrcrest.
Thank you.
And I spoke to Ellie at a neighborhood carnival on June 27th. I let her know I was planning on building. I let her know I had gone through the hoops to get a Provo City comment or a Provo City permit. There were a number of people in our conversation. They asked questions. Where are you going to build? What are you going to do? We talked about it for about 15 minutes. I got this. I was never notified of this hearing until just recently. And Ellie's on vacation. I sent her a text and said, Ellie, would you mind sending me an email so I have something for the record that I told you, that I made sure you knew as president of the board that I was planning on doing this? She said, no problem. And if you look at the time, it's like, 2:30 in the morning because she has a new baby. She's on vacation in California. She's not able to be here, but this is her word. And it's my word that I talked to her and she knew about it. And she's the president of the Marrcrest Homeowners Association.
Appreciate that. Thank you. And maybe I make a request of of staff for future meetings to help me as chair understand who is in the room so that I can make sure suitable opportunities are made for speaking. Okay. I think where I'm sitting here, still probably willing to say due diligence was done. And if internal procedures passed around the way they ought to have, or
Well, this is my feelings on the subject. I think for us to get into who is speaking to truth and who isn't, probably we're just going to assume that everyone has truth from their point of view in making a decision. I do think, perhaps is out of scope, but I think the HOA has an opportunity to update their policies so that everyone can be on the same piece of paper. I do think that Mr. Boyle notified the president. It is the president's obligation then to notify. If you don't have any written, if there are no other written guidelines to say you have to put it in writing. You must copy the entire board. I think a verbal, this is what I'm doing, serves as notification. It's the president's obligation at that point to share that information with the rest of the home. I can appreciate that this is a tough, tough situation. This is a well-attended meeting, and home ownership is as important as it gets when it comes to our lifestyles. So I am certainly open to other points of view, but that's where I'm sitting.
My thoughts are right the same line. I feel that Mr. Boyle did speak to the president and did have a conversation. It was very informal. It sounds like it was during a chaotic family event, and probably, I don't know if it slipped her mind or what, but at that point, responsibility is hers to inform whoever she needs to inform, and whatever she did with that information, I don't know, but it's definitely this is something that the HOA needs to address, its policies, its communication, however they're going to deal with this. But, sensitive to the feelings that are definitely percolating here. And, I hope that this can be resolved, in a friendly manner.
Ready for a motion? Well, I will go ahead and make a motion that the request was indeed not timely, and therefore the rest of the issue is
We don't need the second issue.
I'll vote on that.
Can I get a little legal coaching if we're making sure we're not misstepping?
Yeah, if I understand it, you're making a motion for the board to vote on as to what timeliness. Your motion is that it's not timely, and there was a second I thought I heard. Was there a second?
There was a question whether or not we needed to address the second one for.
If you find that it's not timely, then you do not need to address the merits of whether the permit was issued in error because the appeal was untimely.
Then I'll repeat my my motion that the request was not timely.
I'll second that.
Maria, start off for voting.
Aye.
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 Okay, with that, the appeal is dismissed and our meeting for August is closed. Thank you all for attending. Good luck with everything you're undertaking.